Hi there, I'm Vincent Boss and I provide dating and self-improvement advice. And in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing this happens if you argue with your ex. I provide audio coaching for breakup recovery, trying to get an ex back, attracting someone new, and life coaching. Visit www.dateme.tips for more details. Please check your spam and junk folders if you are expecting an email from me. So now let's get back into today's podcast, and today we are discussing this happens if you argue with your ex. So if you have been dumped and want to try to get your ex back, you need to try and avoid arguments. But what if you can't? In today's podcast, I'll be discussing 3 consequences of arguing with your ex. So let's get straight into this, and point number 1 is attraction is lost. Now when I'm speaking about attraction being lost, in this respect, I'm talking about your ex-dumper. Now the reason why I'm not speaking about you as a dumpee losing attraction is because if you are listening to today's podcast from the perspective of a dumpee, from a perspective of a dumpee who wants to try to get their ex back after arguing, and you still think, you know what, I want to be with my ex, then what this suggests is that the arguing hasn't caused you to lose enough attraction to change your mind. Now, of course, if the arguing was sufficient enough for you to change your mind, you're not likely to be listening to today's podcast. So the reasoning why I'm going to be focusing on your ex's perspective is, of course, you still want your ex back at this time. Now, of course, if the arguing was bad enough for you to start to change your mind regarding your ex, then the attraction you have lost would become more obvious. But right now, at this moment in time, you still want to reconnect. But what happens to your ex-dumper? Well, I would suggest they are going to be losing further attraction towards you. And the reason I say this is because at the time of a breakup, very sadly, they have already lost a substantial amount of attraction to get to the point of becoming a dumper. You know, somebody doesn't end a relationship if they haven't lost attraction already. It's hit the necessary low point for them to action the breakup. Now, if beyond this point you are arguing, you know, whether or not they started it or you started it or for whatever reason it may be, this is going to leave a sour taste in the air, you know, in your mind, in your thoughts. Nobody's going to be feeling good after having an argument. Now, as I've already said, you still want your ex back. So any attraction you may have lost is not going to be substantial. But we're focusing on your ex-dumper, who sadly has already lost a lot of attraction. And arguing is going to likely further this. Now, whether or not they instigated the argument, what you've got to see is that this is not helpful. So, my suggestion is that if you started it yourself, then this is certainly a lesson to be learned about making sure that you don't instigate arguments. In general, you know, that is never going to help your cause in anything in life. But if you feel that there's something that needs to be said and it generates an argument, then unfortunately, you're going to be really focusing and understanding that there is a difference of opinion. And if you believe one thing and they believe another, you have 2 options really. You can either agree to disagree and be okay with it, or you can not be okay with their thought pattern. And this is when you might really need to be focusing and thinking, is my ex somebody I really want back in my life? Because if we're arguing and I don't believe and understand their point of view and it's really frustrating me, then maybe you need to understand that you're just seeing things from such different opinions. Maybe this is why the breakup took place in the first place. Now, if you believe that you can actually get beyond this and you can agree to disagree, this is when you really need to be biting your lip. You need to be thinking, right, I'm frustrated, I can get past this, it's not a deal breaker, but I'm going to be speaking to anybody other than my ex about how I'm feeling right now. A friend, a family member, maybe even myself. Now make sure if it is a friend, but it's not a mutual friend that's going to tell your ex instantly what you're thinking and saying, but if you need to let out some emotion, it's important that you do. But ultimately, arguing is not going to help any scenario with any person in your life. And if you can avoid it, you need to. Because point number 1 about what can happen if you argue with your ex is attraction is lost, and they have already lost a significant amount to get to this point, and therefore if you want to get your ex back, you can't really afford to lose much more. So now let's get into point number 2 and the second point of today's podcast. Please like this video if you're watching on YouTube and subscribe to the channel. And point number 2 is communication breakdown. Now, although this might sound obvious, we need to consider the consequences of a communication breakdown if you're arguing with your ex. Now, at first glance, it might just seem that an argument is going to be a disagreement between you and your ex, and this is where it ends. It's between you two, but there can be further consequences. For instance, if you have children together, if you're in a position where the child lives with you and maybe once a week or so they go to your former partner's house, or perhaps the child doesn't live with you and maybe once or twice a week you get to see your child. When we consider a situation where there's children involved, the last thing you want is a communication breakdown with your ex. And again, this is why it's so important to try and avoid arguments. Because if you have a child together, or maybe you share a pet together, I know of dumpers and dumpees who, for instance, have a dog that they had together in the family home. And right now, one person is predominantly living with the dog, and then maybe once or twice a week, the former partner gets to look after the dog. Whatever it may be, you don't want a communication breakdown. Because if that happens, it could make it very, very difficult for you to see your child, your pet, whatever it may be. It might be much more difficult for you to do this if you are not the one who is mainly living with them, or if you are the person who, generally speaking, has the child or the pet with you. It could cause further problems down the line if, for instance, you need this child or this pet to see your former partner for their own mental health. You know, if it's a child, they're going to need to see their other parent. If it's a pet, they might need to feel that as well. So you need to be considering a communication breakdown can cause problems with other things other than yourself and your ex. Now, I've just mentioned children and pets, but of course, there's more to it than that. If you want to try to sort things out, whether it's get back together or maybe you're actually trying to finalise a divorce, you need to communicate. You don't want lawyers to get involved when they don't have to regarding a breakup. Now, hopefully it doesn't come to that point, but if you can't communicate effectively, you're going to need third parties to do so, and often that can be expensive. So it's not just about children or pets, it can be to do with finances. It could be to do with objects, possessions, items. Communication is absolutely vital. And if you're arguing with your ex, the communication breakdown could be very, very troubling moving beyond this point. It could affect you emotionally, it could affect you in your pocket. You need to be making sure that you do your best to keep the lines of communication as clear as possible. Now, just to add a quick caveat here, and that is, in my belief, most dumpees should never be contacting their ex again unless their ex contacts them first, unless it's for a necessary reason. So you might be listening to this as a dumpee and thinking, well, I don't even want to communicate with my ex. Well, if you don't have children together or pets together or things to be sorting out, then you shouldn't be reaching out to your ex anyway. Okay, your expert dumper needs to reach out to you first in most instances. But if there is an important necessary reason for you to reach out, then of course you need to use your common sense. So now let's get into point number 3 and the final point of today's podcast about this happens if you argue with your ex. And point number 3 is impact on well-being. Now, it's so important to look after yourself, not just physically, but mentally as well. And this is why I always say that you need to release emotion. You need to speak with friends and family members who aren't connected with your ex and are not going to just pass this information on. You need to release that emotion with these people, maybe a local doctor, or maybe you want to speak with myself. You know, if you want advice and support about how to try to increase the chance of getting your ex back, or maybe you want support going through breakup recovery as a whole, then you may want to consider my audio coaching service, where me and you can speak one-on-one about your unique specific situation. Go to my website, www.dateme.tips, for more information about how I can become your coach and your teammate via my audio coaching service. Because the impact on well-being that can take place if you argue with your ex can be substantial. Now, if you want to try to get your ex back, you need to be living a positive life. And you're not going to be feeling positive if the impact on your well-being is due to you arguing with your ex. If you argue with anybody, you're going to be feeling lots of negative emotions. You're going to be feeling sad, frustrated, upset, despondent, low energy, and that is just to name a few. You're not going to be as productive as you could be if you're feeling low energy. So if you argue with somebody such as your ex, you're not going to have the best day that you could have. If you don't have the best day that you can have, you're not likely to go through the achievements and self-improvement that I encourage in all of my podcasts. You need to live your life to the full. You need to become a better person today than you were yesterday, and a better person tomorrow than you are currently today. In essence, you need to become a version 2.0 of yourself to try and get your ex back. Now, how can you do that if you're not feeling good? You're already not feeling good due to the breakup. If you're arguing with your ex and you're feeling even worse, the impact on your well-being can be substantial. You feel low energy, you can't move forward, you can't do what you need to do to improve yourself, to become that version 2.0, to then try and attract your ex. So it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. You might feel that you can't get your ex back, you end up getting into an argument with them, they feel even less attraction towards you, you feel worse, you don't improve as a person, and it goes round and round and round. Try and break that cycle, and it begins by not arguing with your ex. If you believe that this podcast has helped you, then please consider buying me a coffee. The link to do so is in the description.